Pressure is mounting on Rishi Sunak from his own MP to take drastic action after figures showed that legal net migration hit a record high of 745,000 last year.
Sacked Home Secretary Suella Braverman called the number a slap in the face to Britain, and ex-minister Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg said the Conservatives have failed on delivering one of their key manifesto pledges. Well, Mel Stride, Work and Pension Secretary, joins us now. So is this a failure, this number? Or when you look at the figures and you see what those people are coming here to do, is it actually a success? Because what else would the health service and the care service do without these people?
Well, good morning. We recognise that these figures are too high and are not acceptable. And that is why we've taken various measures, recently 150,000 students, for example, looking at the dependents that they have hitherto been bringing over and reducing that number. We've also looked at surcharge for healthcare for others that are coming in on certain visas, and also the cost of the visas themselves. And the OBR is suggesting that those measures and others are actually going to be seeing those numbers coming down. But we need, and we recognise that we need to go still further. And I know that discussions will be being held at the moment within the Home Office and our new Home Secretary, Prime Minister, and so on, because we are quite determined to see those numbers fall. You raise the issue of the positive sides of migration. The key to this really is to make sure that we get a higher level of engagement across our domestic population within the labour market, and that's why the Chancellor had some very important things to say about employment taxes in the recent autumn statement. And indeed, I've made some very recent and very important announcements around welfare and welfare reform and how we encourage more of those who have been out of the labour market back into work.
We'll come on to that in just a moment, if we may. Just want to stick with these figures because 745,000 was the net migration record high last year, which was up from what the expectation was. What is an acceptable number? Because if we go back to 2010, when David Cameron was your leader, he was saying he wants to get it down into the tens of thousands. I mean, that seems like a pipe dream now, doesn't it?
Well, as I say, we recognise that this number is too high.
So what are we talking about? 500,000? Would that be acceptable?
What I'm saying is that we recognise that these numbers are not acceptable.
What we're trying to work out what would be acceptable number.
We need to start bringing. Well, I'm not going to come on your programme and start giving a running commentary on this number by this time or that number by another time, etc.
You were elected in 2010. You campaigned under David Cameron, whose pledge was to cut migration to the tens of thousands. What happened to that pledge? Was it never going to happen? Was it a failed promise? Do you actually have changed your mind and you actually want a different number? These are not unreasonable questions, considering it was a key part of your manifesto.
No, absolutely not. And I've been entirely frank by saying that the number that we're at the moment is not acceptable, and we need to get those figures down. We are, according to the OBR, beginning to see that happen, but we need to go further. And I've also said that there will be a number of important discussions going on at the moment.
You haven't put a number on it. Well, is that because when David Cameron did, it was destined to fail? Is it because you're nervous of putting a number on it?
No, it's because I'm on your programme and I can't start making policy on the hoof, other than to say
though, over
very
13
clearly,
years, you've had 13 years since David Cameron made that pledge. I would have thought that in that time, and you've consistently stood on this in various manifestos at various elections until the last one, you have stood on the fact you're going to reduce net migration. Over that period, you would have come up with a number that would have been acceptable, that you believe managed to navigate the demands and the need for the migration and the staffing that Kate was pointing out in the health service and the care service. And then the people that we want to come over to be able to enjoy the education as well that is offered over here, that is a huge source of income for lots of universities. You would have come up with a number. The fact that you're sitting here this morning, yet again, saying, I can't tell you what the number is, just sounds like you haven't really planned for it.
Well, as I say, there are discussions ongoing at the moment, which I'm not a party to, as Secretary of State for Work and Pensions. I'm not the Home Secretary. So that's not for me to opine on your morning, on my morning news round, other than to be very honest and very frank, as I have been, in acknowledging that the figure is too high. It does need to come down. I've outlined some of the measures we've already taken, that the OBR is already suggesting that will be on a downward trajectory. but that we need to go further. And I know that various things will be being looked at the moment that will become known at some point in the future as to exactly how we further address those issues. But I've also made a very important point here, and this mustn't get lost in this discussion, I think, which is that the domestic labour market can be boosted very dramatically through the reforms that I, as the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, are bringing forward on the welfare side, getting particularly more long-term sick and disabled people into employment and the longer-term unemployed into employment, and indeed the kind of tax incentives that the Chancellor brought in, that huge reduction in the level of employee national insurance, which will drive more people to want to go into work because the incentives have been increased so dramatically. The biggest tax cut, in fact, since the 1980s.
In fact, it's had a good boost on your poll ratings. It's still low, but it is a significant boost. 21% to 25%, 4 points up. However, that's a bonus for you a couple of days after the announcement. However, you know, many think tanks are saying the penalty is going to have to be made in a period of austerity to pay for those tax cuts. Public services could be in a worse position than they were back in 2010 under George Osborne. Are you confident you can deliver those cuts while still having any kind of functioning public service?
So I really don't see us going into any era of austerity, as you put it. And I think there are two important points here. One is that in the autumn statement, the Chancellor came forward with the kind of long-term thinking and actions now that will lead to greater business investment and growth in the economy going forward. So, for example, the 100% full expensing for investments makes us the most competitive destination for businesses out of the G7 and across the OECD. But secondly, we've got to look at productivity. You know, public services aren't all about just constantly spending ever more money. It's about the outputs. And so John Glenn, one of my very capable colleagues, and others across government are absolutely engaged in a mission to improve productivity across the public sector. And I believe it's the case that if we were to increase productivity by 0.5%, for example, there wouldn't be any further pressure on increases in taxes, for example. So I think there's a huge amount we can do through productivity and investing for the longer term to get that growth going.
OK, we're going to leave it there. Mel Stride, thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you.